There are moments in sports media that slip past most people entirely. A phrase here, a word choice there, something so subtle that if you blink, you miss it. But the internet never blinks. And when you're talking about someone like Shedeur Sanders, the internet doesn't just watch, it archives, it compares, it builds cases. And this past weekend, it caught something that a lot of people are calling deliberate disrespect dressed up as professional journalism. We're talking about a single word. One word that has ignited a firestorm across social media, turned a comment section into a courtroom, and exposed what many believe is a pattern of calculated dismissiveness aimed directly at the son of Coach Prime. This isn't about a bad game. This isn't about draft stock or whether he can read a defense. This is about his graduation, a moment that belonged entirely to him, a moment that should have been universally celebrated, and yet somehow, even that got twisted. Shedeur Sanders walked across a stage in Boulder, Colorado this past weekend and received his college degree. Not a certificate, not a participation trophy, a legitimate 4-year undergraduate degree in sociology from the University of Colorado. And he didn't just scrape by. He finished with a 3.9 GPA. Let that sink in for a second. While playing quarterback at a major college football program, while managing the pressure of being Deion Sanders' son, while dealing with the constant media circus that follows his every move, he maintained a 3.9. That's not luck. That's discipline. That's someone who put in the work when no one was watching and came out the other side with something no one can take away from him. The Sanders family didn't keep it quiet either. Well-off media released behind-the-scenes footage of the day, giving fans an authentic look at what the moment meant to him. It was personal, it was emotional, it was real. And just days before, Coach Prime had addressed all the noise surrounding his family with a level of calm that only comes from a man who knows his foundation is rock solid. He said something along the lines of, "I'm not tripping because if I trip, I might have something to fall over." Read that again. That's not deflection. That's peace. That's a father who has watched his son handle business at the highest level and refuses to let the critics shake him. The energy was right. The moment was earned. And then the coverage started. That's when things got interesting. Because while most outlets used the correct terminology, one reporter made a choice that didn't sit right with a lot of people. Kay Cabot, a longtime Cleveland Browns reporter with decades of credibility in the sports journalism world, published a piece about Shedeur's graduation. And in that piece, she wrote that he had returned to Colorado to receive his diploma. His diploma, not his degree, his diploma. Now, if you're reading that casually, you might shrug it off. Diploma, degree, same thing, right? People use those words interchangeably all the time. Why make a big deal out of it? And honestly, that would be a fair point if this existed in a vacuum. But it doesn't, because the internet has receipts, and those receipts tell a very different story. In 2015, Kay Cabot wrote an article about Danny Shelton, a Cleveland Browns player who completed his college education during the offseason. And in that article, she didn't use the word diploma, she used the word degree. She wrote that Danny Shelton was set to receive his degree. The correct term, the academically accurate term, the term that reflects what a 4-year college graduate actually earns. So now we have two players, both Cleveland Browns, both completing their degrees while playing professional football, both covered by the same reporter, and the language is different. Danny Shelton gets called a degree earner. Shedeur Sanders gets called a diploma recipient. And if you're wondering whether there's actually a difference between those two words, ask any college administrator. Ask any academic institution. They will tell you crystal clear that a diploma is what you get when you finish high school. A degree is what you earn after completing a 4-year program at a university. These are not synonyms. They are not interchangeable in professional writing, especially when you've already demonstrated in your own past work that you know the distinction. And that's where the argument stops being about semantics and starts being about intent. Because you can't claim it was just a slip when your own archive proves you've used the right word before. You can't say it was an honest mistake when the evidence shows you knew better and chose differently this time. The reaction was instant. The comment section on Kay Cabot's post turned into a war zone, We're talking about 259 comments, not 10, not 50. 259 people showed up to make their voices heard, and they weren't polite. People started pulling up that 2015 Danny Shelton article and posting side-by-side comparisons. They started pointing out that this fits into a larger pattern of coverage that has followed Shedeur since he arrived in the NFL conversation. Coverage that has repeatedly implied he wasn't smart enough to process complex defenses. Coverage that questioned whether he was truly ready for the mental demands of professional football. Coverage that always seemed to frame his success as something that happened despite his limitations, rather than because of his talent and preparation. And now, on the day he graduates with a 3.9 GPA, the word used to describe it is diploma, the same word used for high schoolers. One comment that went viral said something like, "He earned his college degree with a 3.9 GPA. We remember everything you said about him last season. Every time you speak, it shows how out of touch you really are." Another person called it shameless and classless, pointing out the irony of a reporter who generates her best engagement by using Shedeur's name, but can't give him the basic respect of accurate language when covering a moment that has nothing to do with football. And that's the part that stings the most, because here's the uncomfortable truth that no one in certain media circles wants to admit out loud. Shedeur Sanders is a traffic magnet. His name generates clicks. His story creates content. Every article, every tweet, every hot take that involves him pulls more engagement than most other players on that roster could dream of. And the reporters who have built their brands on being skeptical of him, critical of him, dismissive of him, they're not losing. They're winning. They're growing their platforms. They're earning money, all while using his name as the engine. And yet when it comes time to cover his college graduation, they can't use the right word. That's not journalism. That's something else entirely, but it gets deeper. Because beyond the reporter and the comment section, there's a whole ecosystem around Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland that raises even more questions. There have been images circulating online showing certain content creators, people who publicly present themselves as being firmly in Shedeur's corner, appearing friendly and cozy with the very media figures they claim to oppose. And that raises a question that's uncomfortable but necessary. Is the conflict real, or is everyone just feeding off the same controversy machine? Are these so-called supporters actually in his corner, or are they just using his name as a backdrop for their own content? I'm not saying I have the answers, but the optics are messy. And in an era where engagement drives everything, where Sanders' name is the fuel for multiple people on multiple sides of the conversation, it's worth asking who's really riding for him and who's just riding the wave. The fans deserve clarity. Shedeur deserves better than to have his name weaponized by people who claim to support him while breaking bread with those who minimize him. What should have happened this weekend is simple. A young quarterback returned to his college campus, walked across a stage, and received his degree in sociology with a 3.9 GPA. He honored his father with a recreated photograph. He shared the moment with his community. He spoke about continuing his education and possibly pursuing a master's degree. That's the entire story. It doesn't need controversy. It doesn't need qualifiers. It's complete exactly as it is. Colorado understood that. The media that covered Shedeur during his time in Boulder largely treated him with professionalism and fairness. There were reporters who showed up, did the work, and gave him credit where credit was due. The experience in Cleveland has been different. Not universally, but consistently enough that the pattern is undeniable, and the fans are noticing. They're not a silent majority anymore. They're organized. They're digitally literate. They're pulling receipts and doing comparison work themselves. When the institutions that are supposed to hold coverage accountable don't do their jobs, the community steps in. That's what those 259 comments represent. Not a mob, a movement. A community saying loudly and clearly, we see what's happening and we're going to name it. Shedeur Sanders walked into that graduation ceremony carrying every skeptical take, every dismissive comment, every piece of coverage that framed him as less capable, less intelligent, less deserving. He walked out the other side with a degree and a 3.9 GPA. That's his. Nobody can rewrite it. Nobody can reframe it. It happened. It's real. It's documented. And it deserves to be covered with the language it earned. He didn't receive a diploma. He earned a degree. The word matters. It has always mattered. And the fact that a reporter who has been in the business long enough to know the difference chose not to use it this time, while the archived proof of her own correct usage sits there for anyone to find, tells you everything you need to know about the choices being made in his coverage. Coach Prime isn't tripping. He said it himself. He's not letting the noise pull him down because he knows what his son accomplished and what it means. The Sanders family isn't spending this week arguing with reporters. They're celebrating. They're looking forward. Shedeur is already thinking about a master's degree, about the next chapter, about the future. Because the present is secured and the past is proud. But someone has to stay here and say what needs to be said. Someone has to look at the diploma versus degree comparison and call it what it is. Someone has to acknowledge that the frustration from those 259 fans isn't manufactured. It's earned. You can't build your platform on a young man's name and then describe his college degree with high school language. That's not an accident. That's a choice. And repeated choices reveal exactly where someone stands. The fans are watching. They were watching in Boulder. They were watching when he walked across that stage. They were watching when that article dropped with the wrong word. And they're going to keep watching because this story has too much heat and too many people invested in how it gets told. You don't get to slip things past this community. They notice. They document. They respond. So let the record show that Shedeur Sanders graduated from the University of Colorado with a degree. A 4-year undergraduate degree in sociology. Let it show that he carried a 3.9 GPA across the finish line. Let it show that he honored his father, celebrated his journey, and spoke about going even further academically. And let it show that, when the coverage tried to make that moment smaller, the people who have been with him since day one stood up and made it bigger. Because that's what real support looks like. Not the kind that shows up when it's convenient and vanishes when it's not. The kind that checks receipts. The kind that refuses to let the narrative be rewritten when the truth is right there. He earned his degree. Say it correctly. Say it with the respect it deserves. And if you can't do that, at least have the self-awareness to understand why hundreds of people are telling you that you got it wrong. Because they're not going anywhere. And neither is Shedeur Sanders.